Let's get started. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our discussion today on a topic that's taking all the oxygen out of the room and the internet, Agentic AI, the autonomous promise. We're really looking at this discussion about whether Agentic AI and how will Agentic AI reshape global business services and business as a whole. So I'm very, very pleased to have with me today my childhood friend, as you can see on this generated image, Michael van der Steen, GBS executive. You've had significant positions at Adidas, BMI Group, AkzoNobel. Welcome, Michael, and yeah, welcome to the discussion. And tell us a little bit about how you got into shared services and GBS.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the invitation, Dan. So my journey really started in AkzoNobel, and at that time I just had become leading credit management and working capital for one of the business units, and the CFO said we're going to go on a GBS journey. At the time we were still calling it shared services, and they asked me to become the global process owner for order to cash. And that's kind of how I rolled into it, and yeah, that's now over 15 years ago. So seen different GBSs, built different shared service setups, and also of different sizes and in different capabilities. So yeah, I've seen a lot in the area of GBS, and built, really profited from and benefited from the community that we have as a GBS.
Okay, thanks, Michael, for that insight. So just before we get into the meat of the topic, this session's 30 minutes. You can ask questions on the GoToWebinar panel. You can ask questions as we go through, and I encourage you to do so. We may or might not have time to answer them online, live, because I want to be conscious of time, but we will respond by email to you all afterwards with those responses to the questions and that debate if we don't get time. So that's great. So the topic we're discussing really is we're going to be looking at three big scenarios about Agentic AI. We're going to ask what is it, but then the three scenarios about how it might play out. Now, I think Michael and I both heard this quote, one of many of the forecasts out there. There'll be 1 billion AI agents deployed in the next 10 years. Well, you know, and this is part of the narrative that's creating this intense interest and activity and investment in Agentic AI. And of course, we're moving from a world of singular, lonely AI agents to large groups of agents working together, perhaps in harmony, perhaps in disappointment, as you can see from the little generated image there. But that's just a little bit of fun. But let's start with what exactly is it? Because every time we get a new wave, there's a lot of definitions about. Here's a definition. Michael, what does Agentic AI mean to you?
Well, I hope Steve Rotherham is on the call as well, because he's been asking about this for many times, right? So here it is, Steve. So everything explained for you. But there is a really good book that was written about Agentic AI, and there they compare it with James Bond or 007. So you act independently. It remembers context. It's goal-oriented, and it really should be able to work independently. Now, that being said, it says on the slide as well, there's always going to be some human oversight. Is it not because of EU law? Then it is probably because you want to make sure that some of the things that Agentic does are actually giving the right results. And Agentic AI in the end is you have all these agents, and they all work for MI6, right? So and that's the overarching orchestration of all these agents that are working independently. So in the end, all these agents are working together to deliver an outcome, and that outcome then needs to be determined for that specific process. But that's really it in a nutshell. It's that's how Agentic should be looked at.
And one of the things that I think is confusing quite a lot of people is because this has come hot on the heels of generative AI. Agentic AI doesn't mean it all has to be generative. So the individual components might be generative AI components, there might be more analytical AI components, and that some of those components may be traditional deterministic logic as well. Not everything in the world is AI, but these, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think there's been conversations around, that RPA is dead. And I think it's not that. I think what is happening is we have a backpack of tools, and what we are now doing is we are adding agents and agentic AI to those tools, and they just complement what we are overall delivering. So I think that's really what we're seeing.
I think I do like this, the use of the phrase agentic is about agency. And in a human context, agency is the capacity of us as individuals to make our own choices and take actions that influence our lives and surroundings. So the inference here is the agentic AI action flow, if you like, is kind of self-determining. Is that, that's kind of another part of the promise. So let's move on then. These three scenarios. So if this is agentic AI and it's a new world, there's three big scenarios. And let's start with the one that we're seeing the most reported on and commented on is if agentic AI does meet all of its aspirations, it's going to have a massive economic impact in the world. It's going to be truly transformational, which is a metamorphosis for business. If you cast your mind a few years forward and we've had a phenomenal success with agentic AI, what's your view, Michael, about what that will look like, what some of the use cases will be, and yeah, from what you've seen, what's your view?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the glass half full rather than the glass half empty, because on the one side, yes, there are a lot of challenges in introducing agentic AI, but on the other hand, it has a lot of promise as well. And you can see that in some of the processes, it can actually really increase automation and get better results. So if you combine, for example, traditional OCR, object character recognition, with agentic AI, actually the results that you get out of that tool goes up, right? So instead of 70%, you go to 80 or 90% automation. And that may seem like a small increase, but if today 30% is done manually and that becomes 15%, yeah, that is half of the FTEs that are working on it, right? So it can still have quite a significant impact. As I mentioned earlier, you do need other tools as well. I don't think agentic on its own is going to do the trick. It requires also other toolings to support it. And then what I think is that, and this is where what really excites me is, as a with a big process background, is that today we always have the struggle of we don't have the data and we first need to standardize. And there are now solutions coming up where actually you look at what is happening in the system. So you do deep task mining. That task mining system starts to understand what is actually going wrong in the process, also understands what is the enterprise architecture, so which systems can I utilize? And then you can start to ask this tool, hey, how can I automate this? And then you can also ask it, can you write the code for me for whatever platform you use, UiPath, SAP Joule, etc., and load that into that platform. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. But it makes the cost of coding significantly lower. And the problem that we had in the past with RPA, that it was not governed appropriately, is also gone because it's all documented in this tool. And if you could automate that end to end, so make that agentic, that's really promising, because it just means that instead of automating the 20 variances, you can automate 200 variances in the process. And the system will do it automatically and also give you an idea of the ROI and the business case. So there's a lot of promise there. Can it all be delivered? Not sure. We have to see. But it is very promising that these types of technologies are starting to come up.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think if the economic success is, if we do get to see this, is going to be because business processes operate at higher speed with higher accuracy, which is going to shorten cycle times for revenue, shorten the cycle times for action, going to improve customer experience and customer impact, and create efficiencies, needing less people to do the same work. So that if all those things happen, that's a tremendous impact. Of course, one of the side effects of that could be scenario 2, which again is getting a lot of attention, is if agentic AI creates the enormous impact that is described, then there's going to be you get to the jobs question, right? Like, there's various people saying in some job classes between 20 and 50% of jobs will no longer be necessary. They may disappear. And if scenario 1 is really successful, then scenario 2 may have some impact. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think looking at history, I think you see that when there are big changes in our environment, like, for example, the introduction of electricity, introduction of internet, when there are major digital transformations, people have always found new roles. So I was talking to, in the plane to Lisbon, to SSUN, I was talking to somebody who is in the business of building data centers. And they can't deal with the demand at the moment, right? So there's so many data centers getting built. That means that this trend that's happening now with AI is also creating new work. Now, that will not last forever, but those centers need maintenance. Those centers require support. You need to build the cables to get there for the power that is required. So there's a lot of new work also getting created. So in the end, I believe a lot of it will balance out as well. Where I do have a bit of a concern is that there's now some initial studies that actually shows that people are using their brains less. So they're just not thinking anymore about what the problem is that they see in front of them, because they're just asking ChatGPT. So is that mental capacity going to be, in that sense, is that going to stay the same? And I think the results are very, very preliminary, so we have to wait and see. But that's one of the things that we do need to think about, is that going to have an impact on our society as well?
That's a great point. As you say, every technological wave we've been through always results in creation of jobs we didn't expect or hadn't really foreseen. So, that's a good point. I think the other piece as well, as you described earlier, agentic AI doesn't mean no human impact. There is going to be a human in the loop. So question is, how significant will that be? Will there be new skills required? And I guess the other point is, there's this interesting phenomenon over the past 30 years, through the internet, through every kind of major shift we've had, the productivity paradox, I think Solar came up with it, which is, despite the enormous investments in technology, generally business productivity doesn't dramatically change because new things come in, which comes back to the same point. New jobs are required. So I guess the thing is, we shouldn't overly worry about scenario 2, because it tends to it requires a massive achievement of scenario 1, and also experience says that we will create other job types as well.
Yeah. So there is one thing that I would say, is that we do need to think about, when you talk about social impact, we do need to think about what it means for the type of work that people do. Because what you see today with some of the solutions that are being introduced is it takes away the creativity, right? So you ask and a video is built, it takes away the creativity. So that is also, if people are then just going to be checkers and tick boxing, that's not necessarily what you want. So you need to think about also, how can I use this without taking out all the creativity in the work, because people then are actually not going to like the work anymore, and might actually move out of those types of roles. So it's also something to consider in the social impact.
That's a great point. I think creativity is one of those big discussion points, particularly out of generative AI, because of what's happening with using all the contents of the internet to train the models. It's a kind of interesting question. Some people argue that creativity will die. I suspect it's a wave. I think there will be an attempt to try and automate out creativity. But by definition, if everyone's automated creativity is based on the same baseline, it's not going to be creative. So I think humans, there might be a little drop in that, but I think human creativity is not going to be challenged too much over time. We might see some ups and downs. But so we've talked about the massive economic positive impact. We talk about potential societal impacts, and then the third option is, what if agentic AI proves to be a useful but not transformational technology? Maybe we find in practice the target use cases are more specific and niche than forecast. And this is a classic cycle we see with all technologies, and even when they're phenomenal, there is still a kind of a peak of inflated expectations, which is generally bigger than the reality, but it might be close. What's your view on that? And what do you think? What do you think might happen in that case? And what do you think might cause that to happen?
So for if I talk about global business services, this is not an unlikely scenario, because when and I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence, but when you read some of the documents that the experts have written, you actually see that's more going to be used for example, in pharma, where you can build new a protein and new medicine. It's going to be utilized in, unfortunately, also the weapon industry and in other areas. But actually, when you look at what we do, finance operations, customer service operations, etc., the use cases are not that big. So it takes a bit of time before the AI is ready to really address that. I think another element is that, and I've always been a big believer in lean, is that iterative improvements tend to get better results than trying to transform everything. So you see a lot of companies going into, oh, we need to do AI, and then they come up with these huge programs, invest a lot of money. And I was literally yesterday talking to a CIO of a large retailer, and he said, yeah, we actually stepped out of some of these programs because we felt it was not delivering any value. And we're hearing that more and more. And it's probably more going to be start small, start to build, fail fast, and then learn from your mistakes and find the right use cases. Because we all need to build that experience again, just like what we did when robotic process automation was the next big technology that was introduced.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the irony is that whilst agentic AI has massive promise, the natural sort of behavior of business is to operate in silos, functional silos, not end-to-end cycles. So we might end up applying agentic AI to a lot of small cycles to services that get delivered, but not really to the end-to-end processes, which is a very human problem. So, I mean, I guess the other side effect is if scenario 3 were to occur, we will have seen we already are seeing a massive investment bubble. So there'll be some very disappointed investors because some of the evaluations of some of the companies haven't yet even produced a roadmap are phenomenal. So that's going to have an interesting effect on the finance markets and probably everyone, because that will take a serious hit on the stock markets. And of course, if we have high expectations and we don't achieve them, we'll have underperformance of business cases. We expect a lot of business value, we don't deliver it, which will then result in sort of a lack of trust and retrenchment. So there's a lot of side effects of this option as well. And of course, we've seen it with pretty much every technology cycle. So it's worth thinking that one through. Are there any other thoughts you have about that, Michael?
Yeah, I think that the one element I do see is a little bit different than in the past is that I see the C-suite really expecting very significant cost savings because of the technology. So when I think it's an element of, on the one side, the pressure that we have in today's environment in the economy, where there's just an ask to do more from a cost optimization perspective. But the other element is that when Microsoft of this world announced, oh, we are doing it with less people because we have now AI in place, there's quite a lot of C-suite where they're like, okay, we need to do that as well, so we need to reduce the headcount. And hearing percentages of 20-30% of reduction is not, it's no longer an incident. And to me, that means that if you see that best-in-class GBSs can deliver 8% per annum, 8 to 10% per annum, yeah, 20 to 30% is quite a lot more. So I think there's a big challenge on, okay, how am I going to deliver that while also making sure that I keep the operations running, right? So I think that's something where I really see a change, a step change, and it's also about the promise of the technology, and I would say the consultants that got into the boardroom are selling this story like crazy because that's where they can make the money, right? I think that message is really trickling down into the organizations, and in the end, where we are confronted in GBS and also in other parts of the organization with those types of messages, like you need to deliver this. But BPOs have the same problem.
Mm-hmm. I think that question about job losses is very interesting because we are seeing also people using, some companies using the argument of AI to justify job losses when it doesn't take much analysis to realize the company is having trouble and having to lay people off. But it's much better for your stock price to say it's AI induced rather than poor demand. So we got to
true.
Follow the money every time. No, that's great. So, well, let's talk specifically about what some of the opportunities. So we've got Agentic AI presenting to us. We've got the opportunities there. What are some of the specific opportunities you see from Agentic?
Yeah, I mean, if I bring it back to GBS, right? So I think one of the best examples that I've seen so far is in the area of knowledge management. Because literally what you do is you make it very specific to a certain set of data that you have. So the system is not very quickly going to hallucinate. And you can actually ask questions. And what now is starting to happen is it's not just about asking questions and you get the knowledge back. It's also about you have like a ChatGPT where you ask questions, but you can ask, for example, okay, I want to submit my expense. And then it will say, upload your receipt. And then the system literally reads your receipt, fills in the background the form, and starts to move to the next level. So I think there's loads of opportunity there. I also see that, and that's a really cool example. There's a company in France that's using this, where you literally go online you're looking for a new job, you upload your resume. It loads the resume in the background, but also already suggests to you which potential vacancies could be a good fit. So I think that's something really interesting to see happen.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about Agentic AI is it's about because it's about the agents, it's connecting the dots. And to me, it's almost that we're moving, the promise is moving from kind of enterprise workflow, which every business has, every big business has, to a kind of enterprise action flow, rather than just work getting done. It's actions getting taken by agents of an AI and sometimes deterministic type. And I think that's kind of powerful. And then you can see examples like marketing campaign planning. I can see that. I can see legal research and documentation. That's been talked a lot. Customer credit assessments. I can see that. You mentioned master data cleansing. I mean, that's a great Agentic AI cycle, right from getting right to the source and taking it all the way through. Yeah, I think that could be quite compelling. Bad debt recovery, vendor enablement. Even this, we're trying to get better, or even customer and vendor enablement, trying to make sure that as large organizations we get the right information about the people we trade with. And it sounds so obvious, but it's notoriously difficult to get done well. But if you could have agents working on that, prompting to a portal, going through the cycle, validating, that could be very, very powerful. I think, and I think supplier sourcing in procurement is some level of automating in procurement. I'm a little bit wary, and of course in healthcare you mentioned, creating new treatments and new drugs. I agree with that. Logistics optimization is another good one, but I do think the ones where real money gets executed, if you like, spent or collected, certainly spent, I'm a little bit wary about whether those whole cycles will be agentified. I think parts of them will be. I think customer service is also a caution. You've got to be very sure the customer experience is going to be better rather than just cheaper, because a cheap customer experience often ends up on the P&L in the wrong direction. And then patient care, whilst the drug side of it very powerful, I think patient care also, I think people might be a little bit wary about having an Agentic AI action flow looking after your dearly beloved. But you know, these are interesting things, right? Lots of opportunity, and we've got to work out how they play out. So those are some of the opportunities. What do you see as some of the challenges presented, Michael?
Yeah, I think it's it's the same challenge that we've had. I think in all time in business, it's around people, right? So because it requires a changed mindset. You need to work differently. You need to do things differently, and the type of job that you do changes. So and that's also the same for leadership. It's not just for the people that are actually sitting behind the laptop doing the work, but it's also for the leaders, because you need to look at how things get done differently. And the data just changes, right? The way that you monitor things. So I think there's a very big people element here that we should not underestimate. I was talking to a company the other day that has built a cash application tool with Agentic. And actually what they said was, when I asked, well, why don't you just use the chat functionality? They said, no, people are not ready for the chat functionality. They still want to see a screen that shows the bank statements and shows the detail. Because if they don't see that screen, they're not going to adopt. Well, actually, you could just have a very simple screen with a Google-like interface, where you just ask questions and say, okay, what's the next job that I need to do? What's the next discrepancy in my cash app, right? But people are not ready for that. So I think that people and change is a really big element.
You make a great point, because if you think about that, the devil's in the detail. And when you're talking about money, people want to see it. They don't, and the customer experience, I think, is going to be one of the challenges. Whilst it all seems great to drive efficiency, the customer experience has got to be better. We can't just keep on reducing it. So I think that's going to be an interesting topic. So let's just look at, and you and I talked about this recently, there's a massive opportunity with Agentic AI. We've got to approach it with open arms, but also got to know what questions to ask. So we talked through these. I think I'll be very quick here. It's very easy to get focused on the detail, on the silos, but the end-to-end process is absolutely key, because that's what drives revenue, it drives profitability, it drives customer experience. And we are talking with Agentic about a sequence of actions of task automation. And not every task is good for probabilistic outcomes. And actually, I was talking to somebody recently who said, if you've got a 90% accuracy probabilistic mechanism, and you have 6 actions in a row, then 90% accuracy very quickly gets down to 53%. And you wouldn't want 53% accuracy on an outcome which involved you spending money, for example. So it's worth thinking about. We've got to keep focused on the business outcome. Where's the P&L or working capital impact or customer impact, which drives one of those? And you've talked a little bit about human elements. There's always a human in the loop, even if we haven't designed it in. And I think this is kind of interesting. Not all information or knowledge is digitized, so we've got to be very wary about processes and tasks where where's the information, where's it come from? Human relationships, we see that in retail, particularly high-end retail. And we always know that with any piece of technology, they'll all go wrong. It always goes wrong occasionally. And whose job is it when things go wrong? And we've got to think about this up front. Data quality, you talked about that. It's critical. Interestingly enough, Agentic may give us an opportunity to get better at that, but it's a big issue. And then this whole question about augmentation versus relationship. Versus replacement. What outcome do we want? And also, what outcome is reasonable to achieve the business objectives we want? And then that relates to what's the talent we want. And it's basically, it's as much EQ as it is IQ. So I think that's interesting questions for you to ask yourselves. And just final thoughts, just come back to what we said before. Our automation toolbox has got bigger. It hasn't we haven't replaced everything with one item. We've still got deterministic logic, your ERP, your RPA, everything else. They're all the classic systems. You've got probabilistic analytical AI, you've got generative AI, and you've got these enterprise action flows, which are basically agentic, so Agentforce from Salesforce, ServiceNow, SAP. So we've got to think about those. And then we've got to think about what business problems are we trying to solve. and not every business problem, not every business task has the same characteristic. So these are just things to think about, and you might want to run in your favorite large language model. What are the specific characteristics and examples of each of these classes of business tasks? And maybe there's another one: humanistic tasks, communication tasks, analytical tasks, and logical tasks. So I am very conscious of time. We said we'd do 30 minutes. We've done 30 minutes. Final comments on this cartoon, Michael?
Yeah, there's somebody that I'm following on LinkedIn, and I think you're following him as well.
I'm following you.
He has invented something new. Yeah, I think it's called Hype as a Service. So, I think we need to be really careful that we look at what is proven technology, right? So, can we actually prove it? And that does not mean we should walk away from the opportunity. But we do need to think about, okay, is this actually something that is going to deliver value? And bringing it back to your earlier point on think as a CFO, sometimes we also need to be a little bit careful that we don't ask for 20-page business cases, but just say apple, strawberry, what is bigger? The apple, so let's go for the apple and let people make decisions and empower them to do it. Because if we try to do everything through a business case, it's not going to work and we're not going to deliver on the promise, right? So.
Yeah, fair point. And I guess one final comment, which I think anybody who's been in business a long time, like yourself, Michael, like myself, you realize that we always hope for one silver bullet and life's a bit more complicated, right? So it's a little bit of thought about that. But notwithstanding, future is bright. Let's hope your future with Agentic AI is successful, positive, and creates the right sort of impact. Please, if you haven't put your questions into the panel, the GoToWebinar panel, drop us an email, and as I say, we'll assemble them, give you a response. And with that, I'd like to thank Michael for joining us. Really appreciate the time with you, talking through based on your experiences and all those great brands. And who knows what the future is, but thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Take care.